What is the number one question that mystifies scientists? Number one question.
Mystifies scientists. Is there life on another planet?
Oh, no. Why does Meghan Markle make her own pretzel bags? They don't know why.
That's interesting. She takes it from one bag and puts it in.
Meghan Markle's new interview was presented as a moment of clarity, a chance to reclaim her story and silence years of criticism. But as her carefully chosen words reached the public, one royal expert was already listening closely, noticing details that threatened to unravel everything she hoped to rebuild. For Meghan, this was more than another public appearance. It was an opportunity to take back control after years of accusations, damaged relationships, and relentless debate over why she and Prince Harry walked away from royal life. She appeared composed and confident, speaking with the calm certainty of someone who believed the time had finally come to explain what really happened behind palace doors. Her answers returned to the themes that had shaped her story for years: isolation, misunderstanding, sacrifice, the pressures of motherhood, the desire for personal freedom, and the emotional cost of entering an institution where tradition often seemed more important than individual pain. Everything sounded carefully measured. Nothing appeared accidental. Yet beneath that polished delivery, certain phrases carried an uncomfortable weight. They did not sound like memories being shared for the first time. They sounded refined, tested, and prepared, as though the purpose of the interview was not simply to explain the past, but to replace the version already living in the public mind. The reaction was immediate. Supporters praised Meghan for speaking with vulnerability and strength. They saw a woman finally confronting the system that had silenced her. But critics began doing something far more dangerous. They compared her new statements with older interviews, public speeches, podcast conversations, and previous claims made by both Meghan and Harry. That was when Tom Bower entered the conversation. Bower had spent years examining the broken friendships, palace disputes, family divisions, and conflicting accounts surrounding the Sussexes. He was not interested in the emotions surrounding the interview. He was listening for structure, sequence, and contradiction. And he believed he had found them. The danger was not one explosive statement that could easily be challenged. It was a trail of smaller inconsistencies scattered throughout Meghan's answers. Alone, each one appeared harmless. Together, they suggested that the story was shifting. Harry's limited presence only deepened the mystery. Was Meghan presenting their shared experience, or was she building a new version of events on her own? His silence left that question hanging over every claim. Meghan may have believed the interview had restored her authority. But Bower was already preparing to place her latest words beside everything she had said before. And once Bower began placing Meghan's newest claims beside the stories she had told before, the interview stopped looking like a confession and started looking like evidence. At first, the contradictions were easy to miss. They were hidden beneath emotional language, soft explanations, and carefully framed memories. But one by one, Meghan's newest claims began colliding with her earlier accounts, creating a pattern that even her most loyal defenders could not completely explain away. Meghan described herself as entering royal life with little preparation for the institution's hidden rules. In her telling, she had stepped into a world of ancient traditions, rigid expectations, and private customs that no outsider could fully understand until it was too late. It was a powerful image, a successful woman suddenly surrounded by an unforgiving system she had never been taught to navigate. But that version immediately raised questions. Earlier accounts had suggested that Meghan understood far more about Harry's public position than she now appeared willing to admit. She had reportedly taken an interest in royal customs, recognized the monarchy's global influence, and understood that marrying Harry meant entering one of the most watched families in the world. The difference was subtle, but important. Had she truly arrived unprepared, or was she now emphasizing confusion because it made her later suffering easier to understand? The same uncertainty surrounded her first meetings with senior royals. At different moments, those encounters had been described as warm and informal, then intimidating and controlled. Friendly memories seemed to grow colder each time the story was retold. Her description of palace support also began to shift. Meghan suggested she had been abandoned inside the institution, left to face pressure without meaningful help. Yet previous accounts pointed to aides, advisors, and members of the family who had tried to guide her through public duties, clothing expectations, media restrictions, security concerns, and the complicated limits placed on personal expression. To Bauer, these were no longer harmless differences in memory. They changed who carried responsibility. Meghan insisted that she had wanted to succeed as a working royal, but her critics argued that she resisted many of the traditions required to make that success possible. Curtsying, controlled appearances, official dress, restricted interviews, and the constant demand to place duty before emotion became points of conflict rather than adjustment. The question was becoming unavoidable. Had her memories naturally changed under the weight of pain? Or had each version been shaped to support the argument she needed to make at that moment? Commentators began replaying old interviews. Timelines were compared. Phrases were examined. The permanent archive of Meghan's own words was now working against the sympathy the new interview had been designed to create. Still, Bauer held back his strongest accusation. He allowed the inconsistencies to gather, knowing that the most serious contradiction had not yet been exposed. Yet the most damaging inconsistency was not about palace manners, private conversations, or emotional memories. It concerned the moment Meghan claimed the royal relationship truly began to collapse. Royal scandals are often decided by emotion, but timelines are far less forgiving. Dates, meetings, messages, announcements, and private departures leave a trail. When Meghan's newest version of the royal breakdown was placed against that trail, the gaps became impossible to ignore, and Bauer knew exactly where to strike. Meghan described the collapse of royal life as a slow, emotional awakening. In her account, there was no single moment when everything changed. The pressure built quietly. The isolation deepened. The rules became heavier, the criticism more personal, and the promise of support more uncertain. Eventually, she claimed, remaining inside the monarchy no longer felt possible. But the timeline raised a darker question. If the decision to leave came only after every other option had failed, why did signs of another future appear much earlier? There were suggestions of financial independence, overseas opportunities, private representation, and a reduced royal role developing before the final rupture. Conversations about freedom appeared to exist alongside royal duties, creating the impression that an exit strategy may have been forming while negotiations with the palace were still unfolding. That changed the meaning of everything. Meghan spoke of private discussions with senior royals as moments of resistance and disappointment. Yet it remained unclear whether warnings had been ignored, support had been refused, compromises had been offered, or major decisions had already been made before those meetings began. Were Harry and Meghan pushed toward the door, or had they arrived at the negotiations knowing the outcome they wanted? Bauer began rebuilding the sequence piece by piece. Public announcements, earlier comments, reported meetings, staff departures, statements from both Harry and Meghan. Each fragment narrowed the space in which the newest account could comfortably survive. Even the question of who first proposed stepping back remained uncertain. Harry sometimes appeared to carry the burden of the decision. At other moments, Meghan seemed to describe herself as the one who recognized the danger first. Whether they were fully united on the timing, the risks, and the cost was never completely clear. Their demand for privacy created another contradiction. After leaving, the couple entered interviews, documentaries, public appearances, and commercial projects built partly around the royal experience they said they wanted to escape. Meghan framed the departure as survival. Bauer saw a struggle over status, influence, and control, the right to remain connected to royalty without submitting to its limits. And Harry stood between those competing truths, pulled toward Meghan's freedom while still bound to family, duty, military identity, and inherited tradition. Then came the crucial palace confrontation. In the new interview, Meghan appeared to describe it differently from before. It was not a minor shift. It changed whether compromise had been denied or rejected. Then, Bauer finally addressed the interview directly, and with one devastating comparison, he exposed the contradiction that transformed Meghan's emotional account into a full-scale credibility crisis. Tom Bauer did not challenge Meghan's feelings. He challenged the sequence of events she used to justify them. In his response, he identified one major contradiction. Meghan now claimed she had been denied a meaningful path forward, despite earlier evidence suggesting that options, compromises, and continued royal involvement had been discussed. That contradiction struck at the heart of Meghan's story. In the interview, she presented the crisis as a brutal choice between two unbearable futures: remain trapped inside an institution that was destroying her emotionally, or leave it behind completely. There appeared to be no middle ground, no safe compromise, no realistic path that allowed her to protect herself while remaining connected to the crown. Bauer challenged that picture directly. According to his interpretation, discussions had included modified duties, reduced schedules, periods abroad, greater personal freedom, and arrangements that might have allowed Harry and Meghan to remain part of royal life without carrying its full burden. If those possibilities were genuinely discussed, then the departure was no longer simply an unavoidable escape. It became a decision made after alternatives had been considered. And that changed everything. Meghan supporters could argue that an option offered in private was not automatically workable. A reduced role might still have left her exposed to the same pressures: hostile coverage, rigid control, and emotional isolation. A compromise on paper could have been impossible to survive in reality. But Bauer's accusation was far harsher. He suggested Meghan did not want compromise because compromise still required obedience. In his telling, she wanted royal status without royal restriction, public influence without palace control, and independence without surrendering the prestige attached to the monarchy. Harry's silence made the contradiction even more unsettling. Did he remember those negotiations differently? Had he accepted Meghan's account because he shared her pain, even if the details had shifted? Or was he protecting their united image, knowing that one disagreement could expose a far deeper fracture? Earlier statements were now being compared with the latest interview. Old headlines returned. Previous descriptions of palace meetings resurfaced. The story seemed to change depending on the audience, the moment, and the purpose of the conversation. Bauer argued that Meghan repeatedly presented herself as powerless while making highly strategic choices about timing, interviews, messaging, and public disclosure. The vulnerability that had once strengthened her story was now being used against her, reinterpreted by critics as protection from scrutiny. Inside palace circles, the contradiction was reportedly recognized but left unanswered. Direct engagement would only feed the controversy. Bauer had delivered the central blow. Was Meghan denied every workable future inside royal life? Or did she reject the futures she was offered? Suddenly, the interview's revelations no longer mattered. Meghan's credibility had become the story. But exposing the contradiction was only the beginning, because Bauer's next accusation went deeper, suggesting that Meghan's changing accounts were not accidental memories, but part of a deliberate battle to control royal history. Once the contradiction was exposed, the debate changed. The question was no longer whether Meghan had suffered inside the royal institution. It was whether she had repeatedly reshaped that suffering into a story powerful enough to protect her reputation, weaken her opponents, and secure control over the Sussex legacy. Bauer's accusation now moved beyond one interview. He suggested that Meghan's public appearances followed a pattern, arriving whenever sympathy appeared to weaken or the royal family seemed ready to move forward without the Sussexes. Each appearance offered something new, another painful memory, another private detail, another reason the public should reconsider what happened. Yet beneath the added emotion, responsibility shifted, motives changed, and old disputes returned with a different meaning. The battle was being fought through carefully chosen words. Protection suggested danger. Survival made departure seem unavoidable. Silence implied suppression. Freedom turned separation into courage. Reconciliation offered hope, while truth gave every claim the weight of final judgment. Those words mattered because the Sussex identity had become inseparable from the story of leaving royal life. Their documentaries, books, interviews, charity work, speaking opportunities, media partnerships, and public influence all depended on one essential force: trust. If audiences stopped believing the story, the consequences would reach far beyond one controversy. Bauer argued that Meghan understood the power of palace silence. The monarchy rarely answered personal accusations directly. To royal supporters, that restraint looked dignified. To suspicious audiences, it could appear like confirmation. Meghan could speak in detail while those she accused remained trapped behind protocol. Yet there was another possibility. Meghan may have sincerely believed every version she told. Pain can alter memory. Rejection can make earlier kindness feel false. Betrayal can reorganize the past until complicated events become a simple struggle between victim and institution. But Bauer rejected that explanation. To him, the contradictions were too frequent and too useful to be accidental. Meghan remained at the moral center of each account, while courtiers, advisors, relatives, and former friends became silent figures unable to defend their intentions. Inside royal circles, that created a growing fear. Any private conversation offered in reconciliation could later return as material for another interview. Prince William reportedly saw that danger most clearly. Trust, once broken, could not be rebuilt, while every intimate exchange remained vulnerable to public reinterpretation. Charles faced a more painful conflict. He had to protect the crown, yet doing so risked closing the door on Harry. And that was the interview's hidden cost. It had not only placed Meghan's credibility under pressure, it may also have damaged Harry's last remaining path back to the family he had left behind. And as the palace absorbed the consequences, the deepest damage began to appear not in official statements or public headlines, but in the widening silence between Harry and the family he once believed would always take him back. For Prince Harry, the controversy was no longer simply about defending his wife. Every contradiction reopened old wounds: his anger toward the press, his distrust of the palace, his grief over his mother, and his fear that returning to the royal family might now require challenging Meghan's version of their shared past. Harry was trapped in a position with no safe exit. If he defended Meghan openly, he risked deepening the break with his family. If he questioned even one detail, he could damage the united image that had protected them through years of criticism. Loyalty had become both his shield and his prison. His silence only made the tension more intense. Had he approved every claim before the interview was released? Did he agree with Meghan's version completely? Or had some of the strongest statements reached him at the same moment they reached the public? Without an answer, silence could mean anything: agreement, discomfort, exhaustion, protection, or fear. For years, Harry had believed Meghan saved him from an institution he saw as emotionally destructive. She offered escape from the pressure, the control, and the constant judgment that had shaped his life since childhood. But freedom came with a cost he may never have fully understood. Leaving royal life meant losing daily access to family, military connections, trusted friendships, ceremonial purpose, and a secure place within British public life. The institution he rejected had also given him identity. Now, Bauer's criticism forced Harry toward an impossible choice. He could support Meghan more forcefully and strengthen the appearance of unity. Or he could remain quiet and allow suspicion to grow around whether they still remembered their departure in the same way. The contradiction also threatened his relationship with Charles. If private compromises had once been offered, then Meghan's latest account could appear to erase the king's attempts to preserve a place for his son. William's reaction was even colder. To him, the interview was not a misunderstanding. It was proof that private reconciliation carried unacceptable risk. Harry may have feared that admitting one inconsistency would allow critics to dismiss every grievance he and Meghan had ever raised. Their united front therefore became essential. Yet the more tightly they defended one shared narrative, the less room remained for complexity, doubt, or private disagreement. Perhaps Harry no longer viewed the past through dates and negotiations. Perhaps he saw it through loyalty, defending the larger truth of Meghan's pain, even when individual details were challenged. That was the tragedy. The more fiercely he protected Meghan from the royal family, the further he moved from the relationships he still appeared to mourn. And inside the palace, patience was turning into something far more final. While Harry struggled inside that impossible divide, the palace moved toward a decision far colder than confrontation. It would stop trying to correct the Sussex story and simply build a monarchy in which their version no longer mattered. The monarchy had survived accusation, rebellion, scandal, and betrayal by mastering one weapon better than any public figure: time. Rather than challenge Meghan point by point, the palace began preparing a quieter response, removing her claims from the center of royal life and allowing the institution to move forward without explanation. Inside royal circles, the calculation was cold but simple. A direct rebuttal would only give the interview more power. Every denial could trigger another accusation. Every correction could open the door to another private memory, another televised response, and another bitter cycle that kept Harry and Meghan at the center of the monarchy's future. So the palace chose restraint. For generations, the crown had relied on controlled silence, public duty, symbolic appearances, and the slow force of institutional memory. Personal stories could dominate headlines for days or months. The monarchy survived by thinking in decades. Charles understood that strategy, even if it came at a personal cost. As king, he had to protect the institution. As a father, he knew that publicly confronting Meghan could push Harry even further away. His caution was not forgiveness. It was the painful recognition that defending himself might destroy what remained of their relationship. William appeared less conflicted. To him, the interview confirmed that private trust had become dangerous. Future conversations with Harry would need stricter boundaries. Sensitive matters could no longer be shared freely. What had once been a family disagreement was becoming a permanent security of silence. Meanwhile, Catherine represented the palace's alternative message: discipline, service, family stability. Continuity. She did not need to answer Meghan directly. Her restraint allowed the institution to present a different form of power, one built not on emotional disclosure, but on endurance. The consequences for Harry and Meghan could be quiet, yet severe. Invitations might become rarer. Ceremonial involvement could disappear. Informal family access, once protected by affection, might slowly become impossible to recover. Bauer's intervention made that strategy easier. He had voiced the accusations the palace would never dare make publicly. Royal supporters now used Meghan's contradictions to question her entire account, including claims that may have reflected genuine pain. But her defenders saw something darker: an establishment closing ranks against a woman who challenged ancient rules. The conflict expanded beyond one interview into a battle over race, class, celebrity, marriage, privacy, and loyalty. Meghan now faced a dangerous choice. She could retreat and allow Bauer's version to harden. She could confront him directly. Or she could speak again, risking fresh contradictions in the attempt to repair the first. But Meghan had never built her public life around retreat, and as pressure mounted, one final question remained. Would she confront Bauer's accusations or reveal even more in an attempt to reclaim the story once again? The interview was meant to close an old chapter, but instead it reopened every unresolved question surrounding Meghan's royal life. By exposing the contradiction at its center, Tom Bauer transformed one media appearance into a battle over credibility, memory, loyalty, and who will ultimately write the history of the Sussex departure. At the heart of that battle remained one damaging question. Had Meghan truly been left with no meaningful future inside the monarchy? Or had alternative arrangements been discussed before she and Harry walked away? Reduced duties, greater independence, time abroad, and a continued connection to the crown complicated the image of an escape with no other possible ending. That uncertainty began changing how audiences viewed everything else. Her story of sacrifice, exclusion, mistreatment, and survival was no longer judged only by its emotional power. Every claim now carried the shadow of comparison. Every new detail invited people to search for an older version. That was Bauer's greatest victory. He did not need to prove that every allegation Meghan had made was false. He only needed to create enough doubt that nothing she said in the future could be accepted without examination. Meghan, however, had spent years resisting the people who tried to define her. Royal commentators, palace advisors, estranged relatives, and hostile newspapers had all attempted to shape her identity. She may have believed that small contradictions could not erase the emotional truth of feeling trapped, unsupported, and unable to survive within the institution. Bauer's answer was brutal. Emotion could explain memory, but it could not excuse a changing factual framework from someone demanding public trust. The consequences reached Harry as well. Any reconciliation with Charles or William depended on privacy, honesty, and confidence that family conversations would remain private. Yet those foundations had nearly disappeared. Meanwhile, the monarchy continued forward. Ceremonies, public service, family milestones, and the line of succession slowly pushed the Sussex conflict away from the center of royal life. Meghan could still respond. She could challenge Bauer, produce private evidence, or remain silent. But every option carried danger. More information might settle the dispute or expose another inconsistency. The struggle had become larger than one interview. It now contained royal secrecy, private suffering, institutional power, family betrayal, media calculation, and the fight to control history itself. The final question was no longer why Meghan and Harry left. It was which version of their departure would survive. Because inside the royal family, stories are rarely forgotten. Contradictions are never harmless, and the most dangerous secrets are often the ones revealed by those who believe they have finally taken control.